Daniel Redwood had everything a man could ever dream of: a grand mansion in Bel Air, a fleet of luxury cars, and a real estate empire stretching across the West Coast. But above all, he had Leila Morrow, the woman he had once sworn to cherish for eternity. Their love story had unfolded like a classic American romance, complete with candlelit dinners, strolls along Malibu's sun-drenched beaches, and whispered dreams of the future. Leila was more than just a beautiful wife, she was his partner in every sense of the word. A talented interior designer with an eye for elegance, she had transformed their mansion from a cold display of wealth into a warm and inviting home. The walls bore her artistic touch, from the imported drapes from Italy to the handcrafted tiles from Spain. Every room held a piece of her soul, a reflection of the love and dedication she poured into their life together. For years, they seemed like the perfect couple. Friends envied their glamorous lifestyle, and the media occasionally caught glimpses of them at exclusive charity galas or high-profile events. Behind the scenes, however, their world was not as flawless as it appeared. Daniel's business, Redwood Enterprises, was expanding rapidly, and with that success came an insatiable hunger for more deals, more late-night meetings, more pressure. Leila understood the demands of his career. She had always admired his ambition, the way he could command a room with his confident smile and effortless charm. But as time went on, she began to feel the weight of his absence. The quiet Sunday mornings they once spent reading on the terrace had been replaced with hurried breakfasts and brief phone calls before he rushed out the door. Their romantic getaways to Napa Valley turned into solo evenings for Leila, staring at the empty seat across from her at the dinner table. Then, one crisp autumn morning, Leila discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with a mix of joy and trepidation. This child would be a new chapter, a chance for them to reclaim what they had lost. She imagined Daniel's reaction, the excitement in his eyes, the way he would lift her off her feet and spin her around like he had when they first fell in love. But reality was far less magical. When she called to tell him the news, his response was warm but rushed. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I have to jump into a meeting, but let's celebrate tonight." She swallowed the lump in her throat, telling herself that his excitement was real, even if his timing was poor. That evening, Daniel came home early for the first time in months, carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, her favorite. They sat together, dreaming about baby names, nursery colors, and the kind of life they wanted to build for their child. For a brief moment, it felt like old times, as if love alone could mend the distance that had crept between them. But deep down, Leila couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. And soon, she would learn that love, no matter how deep, was not always enough to keep a marriage whole. Leila had always prided herself on being an understanding wife. She knew Daniel's work was demanding, and she had done her best to be patient, even as his late nights at the office became more frequent. She reassured herself that this was temporary, that once the baby arrived, they would return to the life they had built together. But doubt had begun to creep in, slow and insidious. It started with the small things, Daniel's cologne lingering on his suit jacket, but mixed with a scent that wasn't hers. The way he would silence his phone the moment she entered the room. The name Vanessa Clark becoming a constant in their conversations about work. Leila tried to push the worries aside. After all, Daniel had never given her a reason to doubt him before. But when she suggested a weekend getaway to Santa Barbara, a chance to reconnect before the baby arrived, his reluctance was like a slap to the face. He finally agreed, but when they got there, he spent more time on the phone than with her. And then, on their last day, when his phone rang once more, she caught a glimpse of the caller ID. Vanessa. Her heart clenched, but she said nothing. Confrontation had never been her way. Instead, She told herself she was imagining things, that she was just being emotional because of the pregnancy. But the gnawing unease never left her. 3 days later, the truth revealed itself in the simplest, cruelest way. Leila had been organizing Daniel's closet when a folded receipt slipped from one of his jackets. She picked it up without much thought, expecting it to be from a business lunch or a dry cleaning bill. But as she read the details, her blood ran cold. La View Hotel, Los Angeles. Dinner for 2. A suite booked for the night. Date, 2 nights ago. The night he had told her he was working late. Her hands trembled as she placed the receipt on his desk, right where he would see it. She walked into the nursery, the room she had poured her heart into, and sat on the floor, wrapping her arms around her growing belly. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Not to Daniel, but to her unborn child. That night, when Daniel came home, she was waiting. She didn't need to say anything. She simply handed him the receipt. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Say something," she whispered, her voice raw with pain. "It's not what you think," he stammered. Her heart shattered. "It's exactly what I think." He tried to explain, to justify. "It was a mistake. I was stressed, and Vanessa." "Don't," she cut him off, shaking her head. "Just don't." Her voice was calm, but her decision was made. "I want you out." And for the first time in his life, Daniel Redwood, the man who had always been in control, realized he had lost everything that truly mattered. The moment the door slammed behind him, Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. He had never known true fear before, not in business, not in life. But now, standing alone in the grand mansion that once felt like a home, he was terrified. Leila was gone. For 2 days, silence filled the house where laughter used to echo. Daniel tried calling her, but each call went straight to voicemail. He sent messages, long, desperate texts spilling out apologies and pleas, but there was no response. He even drove to Rachel Bennett's house, hoping she would tell him where Leila had gone. Rachel met him at the door with a glare sharp enough to cut through steel. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed her," she said coldly before shutting the door in his face. Daniel wasn't used to feeling helpless. He had built his empire through strategy and control, making all the right moves at the right time. But now, no amount of money or influence could fix what he had done. His next call was to Leila's cousin, Morgan Smith. He barely got through the first sentence before Morgan's voice turned to ice. "She doesn't want to see you, Daniel. Please, I just need to know if she's safe." Morgan hesitated, then sighed. "She's safe. But that's all you need to know." And just like that, Daniel understood, he had lost her. He wandered through the house that night, pausing in the nursery. The pastel walls, the crib draped in soft fabric, the tiny stuffed animals Leila had carefully placed, it was all still there, waiting for a baby that would arrive in a home now broken. He sat on the floor, head in his hands, as the weight of his actions crushed him. For the first time in years, he cried. But regret wouldn't bring Leila back. While Daniel drowned in remorse, Leila was driving north, away from the life she once knew. The road stretched endlessly before her, winding through golden fields and vineyards. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, as she fought the urge to turn around. But she couldn't. Not this time. Morgan and his wife, Zoe, welcomed her into their countryside home with open arms. They didn't push her to talk. They simply let her be, offering comfort in the form of home-cooked meals and quiet companionship. As days passed, Leila slowly began to breathe again. she saw an obstetrician who reassured her that the baby was healthy. She started making plans, not for the life she had once envisioned with Daniel, but for a new one where she could stand on her own. Yet, late at night, when the house was quiet, she would catch herself reaching for her phone, her heart aching. Because no matter how deeply he had hurt her, Daniel Redwood was still the father of her child. And at some point, she would have to face him again. Daniel Redwood had never felt powerless before. His entire life had been built on control, controlling his business, his image, and even, in some ways, his marriage. But now, with Leila gone and their unborn child growing inside her miles away, he realized that control meant nothing without love. The first few weeks after Leila left were agonizing. He barely ate, barely slept. He threw himself into work, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if he fixed Redwood Enterprises, he could somehow fix his personal life. But no matter how many deals he closed, how many meetings he attended, nothing filled the void of coming home to an empty house. His parents, Stephen and Dorothy Redwood, flew in from San Diego after hearing about what happened. His father, a man of few words, simply shook his head in disappointment. "You messed up, son. Now you have to live with the consequences." His mother, Dorothy, was softer. She hugged him and whispered, "Fix this, Daniel. Don't let your child grow up without a father." But fixing things wasn't easy. Daniel tried everything to reach Leila. He called, he texted, he even sent letters. No response. He knew Rachel and Morgan were shielding her, and he couldn't blame them. He had given them every reason to keep her safe from him. One evening, after another long, restless day, Daniel sat down and wrote a heartfelt letter. "Dear Leila, I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I am sorry. I know words mean little after what I've done, but I also know that actions can show more than apologies ever could. I want to be there for you and for our child, not just financially, but as a father. Please, just give me a chance to prove that I can be better. With all my regret, Daniel." He sent the letter, hoping, praying, that she would read it. It was Rachel who finally convinced Leila to see him. "He's in pieces," she told her. "I'm not saying you should forgive him. But you should talk to him, if not for yourself, then for the baby." Leila hesitated, her heart heavy. She wasn't ready to face Daniel, to hear his excuses, to see the regret in his eyes. But deep down, she knew Rachel was right. She agreed to a meeting, choosing a small cafe in Napa Valley, a neutral place where she could control the conversation. Daniel arrived early. When she walked in, his eyes went straight to her belly. His face, once so confident, now looked pale and worn. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who had betrayed her, but as the man who had lost everything. Leila sat across from him, her hands resting on her stomach. "I'm not here for apologies," she said firmly. "We need to talk about the future of this child." Daniel nodded, his voice hoarse. "I'll do whatever it takes to be in their life." For the first time since she had left, Leila saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected, genuine remorse. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. But it wouldn't be easy. Leila never thought she would call Daniel when the time came. She had planned to do this on her own, to bring their child into the world without him by her side. But as the first sharp pain of labor struck, instinct took over. "Call Daniel," she whispered to Zoe as they rushed to the car. Zoe nodded, dialing his number as Morgan sped through the quiet Napa roads toward the hospital. Meanwhile, Daniel was in his Los Angeles office when his phone buzzed. Seeing Zoe's name on the screen, his heart nearly stopped. He snatched the phone up before the second ring. "She's in labor," Zoe said quickly. "We're heading to the hospital now." Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, left everything on his desk, and raced to his car. Speed limits meant nothing in that moment. His only thought was getting to Leila in time. By the time Daniel arrived at the hospital, Leila had been in labor for several hours. He rushed into the waiting area, breathless, desperate to see her. Morgan met him at the doors, arms crossed. "She's in pain. This isn't about you right now." Daniel swallowed hard. "I just want to be here. Please." After a long pause, Morgan sighed and stepped aside. "Don't make this harder for her." When Daniel entered the hospital room, Leila was gripping Zoe's hand, her face contorted in pain. She turned her head and saw him standing there, and for a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. "I'm here," he whispered, stepping closer. Leila didn't push him away. Instead, she closed her eyes and focused on the only thing that mattered, their child. For 12 grueling hours, Daniel stayed by her side. He held her hand when she let him, stepped back when she needed space, and watched helplessly as she fought through every contraction. He had never felt so useless, so completely at the mercy of something greater than himself. Then, just as dawn broke, a baby's cry filled the room. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the doctor lifted a tiny, pink-faced newborn and placed her gently into Leila's arms. Tears streamed down Leila's face as she looked at their daughter for the first time. "She's beautiful," Daniel choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. Leila, exhausted and overwhelmed, glanced at him. For a moment, there was no anger, no betrayal, just two parents in awe of the life they had created. "Meet your daughter," she murmured. Daniel leaned closer, his heart pounding. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing the soft, delicate skin of his child. He had made countless mistakes in his life, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain: he would never, ever fail this little girl. And maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to prove that to Leila, too. Bringing Aurora home should have been the happiest moment of Leila's life, but instead, it was layered with uncertainty. She was grateful for her daughter, overwhelmed by love every time she looked at the tiny baby nestled in her arms. But the presence of Daniel, his quiet determination, his unwavering efforts, left her torn. After leaving the hospital, she returned to Morgan and Zoe's house in Napa Valley. Daniel, however, didn't go back to Los Angeles. Instead, he rented a small apartment just a few blocks away, refusing to be a distant father. Every morning, he arrived with groceries, fresh flowers, or anything he thought might help. He took out the trash, ran errands, and most importantly, spent every moment he could with Aurora. At first, Leila resisted. She didn't need him fixing things. He couldn't undo the past with acts of service. But as the weeks passed, she couldn't deny that Daniel was not the same man who had betrayed her. She saw it in the way he held Aurora, as if she was the most precious thing in the world. She saw it in his exhaustion, the dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights spent worrying about both of them. She saw it in the way he never pushed her for anything. He simply showed up every single day, proving that he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, after putting Aurora down for the night, Leila found Daniel in the living room folding laundry. She paused, watching him in silence. The old Daniel Redwood wouldn't have done this. The old Daniel Redwood had taken too much for granted. "Thank you," she said softly. He looked up, startled. "For what?" "For being here. For Aurora." His eyes filled with emotion. "She's everything, Leila. You both are." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he had truly changed. But trust, once shattered, was not so easily rebuilt. As the months passed, Leila allowed Daniel to take on more responsibilities. He attended every doctor's appointment, helped with feedings, and took Aurora for strolls through the vineyards. Slowly, their dynamic shifted, not as husband and wife, but as two parents learning how to navigate this fragile new reality. One afternoon, Daniel approached her with an offer. "I found a cottage on the outskirts of town," he said. "It's small, but it has a garden, plenty of sunlight, and enough space for Aurora. I'd like to buy it for you, or we could buy it together, as partners." Leila hesitated. She didn't want to feel like she owed him anything. "You wouldn't," he reassured her. "I just want you both to have a home that feels right." She agreed to think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. For the first time since she had left him, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, redemption wasn't out of reach after all. For months, Daniel had done everything right. He had been present, patient, and persistent, proving to Leila in every possible way that he was not the man he used to be. He had shown up for their daughter, respected Leila's boundaries, and never once asked for more than she was ready to give. But when Redwood Enterprises called him back to Los Angeles, everything hung in the balance once again. Daniel knew he couldn't ignore his company forever. While he had spent the last several months in Napa Valley, Redwood Enterprises had been struggling. The merger he once fought for had fallen apart, investors were growing restless, and without strong leadership, everything he had built was at risk of collapse. One evening, as he sat across from Leila in the dimly lit living room of Morgan's house, he finally told her. "I have to go back to LA," he said carefully, watching her reaction. "The company needs me." Leila tensed, her arms crossing over her chest. "So that's it? You're leaving?" "No," he said firmly. "I don't want to leave you. Or Aurora. That's not what this is." He hesitated before adding, "Come with me." Leila's breath caught in her throat. He must have seen the fear flash in her eyes because he quickly added, "Not to the mansion. We could get a different place, somewhere new. No ghosts, no memories. Just a fresh start." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the couch. The thought of returning to Los Angeles, to the city where her heart had been broken, sent a wave of anxiety through her. She had built a quiet life in Napa Valley. Here, she felt safe. Going back felt like stepping into dangerous territory. "I can't go back there," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then I'll figure something else out." For days, Leila wrestled with the decision. She called Rachel, who still held a grudge against Daniel but admitted that people could change. "Only you can decide if his remorse is real," Rachel told her. "But from what I've seen, he's been trying." Morgan, though protective, was more practical. "You have a daughter with this man, Leila. If you're ever going to see if there's a future, you have to take a step forward." Finally, after a sleepless night, she made her choice. "I'll go," she told Daniel the next morning. "But only temporarily. Just to see if this works." His eyes lit up with cautious hope. "That's all I'm asking for." Daniel found them an apartment in Los Angeles, not in Bel Air, but in a quiet neighborhood near the Redwood Enterprises headquarters. A place without history, where they could redefine what they were. As they packed their things and prepared to leave Napa Valley, Leila felt a mix of fear and something else she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Moving back to Los Angeles, even temporarily, was harder than Leila had anticipated. The city held too many memories, some beautiful, some painful. But for the sake of Aurora, and for the possibility of a future where Daniel could truly prove himself, she was willing to try. Daniel had rented a modest yet elegant apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the sprawling Bel Air mansion where their marriage had unraveled. There were no extravagant chandeliers, no grand staircases, just a cozy space with warm lighting and a small nursery set up for Aurora. It was a far cry from the life they once shared, but for Leila, that was a good thing. Life in Los Angeles quickly became a test of Daniel's resolve. Redwood Enterprises was in crisis mode, and the pressures of the business were as relentless as ever. But unlike before, Daniel refused to let his work consume him. He left the office at reasonable hours, came home for dinner, and was fully present with Leila and Aurora. When Aurora woke up crying at night, he was the one who got up first, rocking her gently in his arms until she drifted back to sleep. When Leila needed space, he gave it to her, never pressing for more than she was willing to give. And for the first time, Daniel sought help, not just from Leila, but from a professional. He started attending therapy, something he once would have dismissed as unnecessary. But now, he saw it for what it was, a way to understand why he had made the mistakes he did, and how he could become a better man. One evening, after putting Aurora to bed, Daniel approached Leila cautiously. "I've been seeing a therapist," he admitted. "Trying to figure out how I let things get so bad between us." Leila looked up, surprised. "And what have you figured out?" He sighed. "That I took you for granted. That I let my own ambitions blind me. And that I never really knew how to handle pressure without shutting people out." He hesitated before adding, "I don't expect therapy to fix everything, but I want to do the work. I want to be better." Leila studied him carefully. The old Daniel, the man who had always been so sure of himself, so unwilling to admit fault, would never have said those words. Maybe, just maybe, he really was changing. Despite Daniel's efforts, Leila remained cautious. She had seen his remorse, but she wasn't ready to let her guard down completely. She still carried the pain of his betrayal, and she knew that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. But each day, she saw glimpses of the man she had once loved, not the wealthy businessman, not the charming socialite, but the man who held their daughter with such tenderness, who listened when she spoke, who was finally, truly present. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start. Life has a way of teaching us lessons through pain, regret, and second chances. Daniel and Leila's story is not just about betrayal and reconciliation, it is about the choices we make, the consequences we face, and the effort it takes to rebuild what is broken. One of the most profound lessons here is that love alone is not enough. A marriage, like any meaningful relationship, requires attention, effort, and above all, respect. Daniel had everything: wealth, success, and a loving wife, but he took for granted the one thing that mattered most. His story is a stark reminder that neglecting the people we love, even unintentionally, can lead to irreversible damage. But there is also hope in their journey. True remorse is shown through action, not just words. Daniel didn't just apologize, he changed. He put in the work, day after day, proving that redemption is possible, but only when we are willing to take responsibility and commit to growth. For those who have ever been hurt or betrayed, Leila's journey teaches us another important lesson: forgiveness does not come quickly, nor should it. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, and healing is a process, not an event. For many older adults who have weathered their own storms in love and life, this story is a reminder that while mistakes may define a moment, they do not have to define an entire lifetime. With patience, honesty, and effort, even the most painful chapters can lead to a new beginning.